Hi, I'm Alex, a photographer and videographer. I left the creative industry after COVID in pursuit of stability, but after 3 years of doing corporate, I left and now I'm back as a creative because I realized that there's so much more that I can do for myself and everyone in this industry. So it's been about 8 months since I've been doing this full time. And as a photographer and videographer, I've covered a lot of projects, but chief among that was about 100 over events as a photographer as well. And I would say that in the genre of events that I've covered so far, conferences is probably one of the most challenging ones that I had to cover because it is physically very straining on the body. When I talk about conferences, these are usually multi-day events with hundreds, if not thousands of people attending. In the recent one that I covered, which is by Amazon Web Services, there was about 600 over people attending a 3-day event. Now, in that particular event, at times there can be a lot happening all over the place. And there were 2 photographers, including myself. We've had to run all over the place to ensure that coverage was adequate. And also during keynote speeches or stage discussions, we need to cover the key moments on stage quickly and then move out of the way because nobody likes a photographer pointing a camera at them the entire duration of their speech. And between these speeches is a lot of waiting time. And that waiting time can really wear you down because you have to remain active and wait for key moments like an audience asking a question or some other thing that needs coverage. Couple that with the fact that as a photographer, I'm carrying 2 camera bodies, each with a lens attached and also a flash, and each set weighs about 3+ kilograms, and that is a lot of strain on my hands and my body. And at the end of these 18-hour days, I'm basically dead. Okay, so what's the point in talking about conferences then? Well, after the event, I ended up with about 8,000+ pictures, and I realized that I can also be more efficient as a photographer, covering less pictures while still getting all the important moments. Regardless, after such a long event, you end up with a lot of pictures that you have to process anyway. And when my wrist is already hurting from carrying 3+ kilograms of camera every single day for the duration of the event, now I have to use the same wrist to edit these thousands of pictures before I hand it over to the client. I'm at an age where I'm no longer able to cope doing this using solely a mouse and keyboard, because if I do that, I'll probably end up with a numb wrist, which has happened in the past. So in the span of 8 months, while doing my projects, I've also been looking into tools to reduce the strain on my wrist and also make my workflow more efficient. Now in front of me, I have 3 of these tools. Some are called macropads, some are called controlled surfaces, but they basically exist as editing tools. Now I almost exclusively use mine for Lightroom, but these also work for a whole range of other applications like Photoshop, video editors, graphic design software, you name it. Because at the core, you're basically assigning functions from the software into these keys and using the dials here to adjust the functions. Versus using a mouse where in my circumstance, I have to drag and click sliders a lot of times over hundreds of pictures, there really is no comparison if I were to use a dial like this instead. Because if I were to do all of my work on a mouse like this, even though it's an ultralight model, my hand basically goes numb after I'm done. But why multiple devices? It's because I like to optimize, to experiment with these things to find out which works the best for me. And today, I'll go into the MMD KM16 Pro macropad with 3 dials first, because this is the one I've been using the longest. So as you can see here, there is 16 keys, 2 small dials and a big dial, and you can freely assign keyboard functions to them. Since I'm using this for Lightroom, you can see that I've assigned the top row to filter and flag pictures. And for the rest of the keys, these are functions that I normally use during the editing stage, like white balance, cropping, gradient and radial filters. Now I've kept this pad for a long time, specifically because of these 3 dials and how I can program their use in Lightroom. Lightroom on the Mac gives you 3 stages of adjusting a slider if you're doing it using keyboard shortcuts. Plus and minus are standard increments. Holding Shift and plus minus gives you bigger adjustments, and holding Option and plus minus gives you smaller adjustments. If I were to use the exposure slider as an example, you can see that the standard adjustments go in 0.1 steps, while larger adjustments go in 0.3 steps and micro adjustments go in 0.01 steps. This pad allows me to program all three of these adjustment steps into the dials. I have the standard and large steps assigned to these small dials and the micro steps assigned to the large dial. In my editing workflow, I will be adjusting the images using the standard steps first and then fine-tuning it using the micro steps. It works the same for most other sliders like temperature, tint, contrast. The caveat here is that using this particular pad, you have to select the slider first using either your mouse or using the comma full stop keys to alternate between sliders. In my view, this is probably the biggest downside of using this pad in Lightroom, because to target specific sliders which are not necessarily next to each other, I'll have to first navigate to them using the comma or full stop keys, which I can't really do via muscle memory. Because jumping from exposure to, say, highlights takes 2 key presses, while going from highlights to temperature takes 5 in the other direction. I'm usually not adjusting all these sliders in the same order, so I have to consciously look at which slider I'm targeting first, then look at the image to make the adjustments. Over the course of hundreds of images, this can take up time. The other tools that you saw have Lightroom-specific software plugins that takes care of this particular issue, but I'll go into those in another video. Now, why I'm keeping this is because it's universally a well-designed macro pad with an aluminum body which is very solid, aluminum dials which is really nice to turn, and if you are a fan of mechanical keyboards, you can modify not just the keycaps, but you can also change the switches to be clicky or silent, depending on your personal preference. And of course, you can use this wired or wireless, and finally, the most important feature for most people, RGB. But to me, this is just something I turn off because it's a novelty that drains battery. To each their own. So there's a lot to like here about the MMD KM16 Pro, even though it's not perfect for my specific use. And with the open source method of assigning keys, there is a lot of potential to use this in other applications without worrying that the manufacturer will stop supporting this device in the future. So yeah, I hope that this overview has given you a good idea of what to expect if you were to buy something like this for your particular editing workflow. It doesn't have to be photos, it could be something else like video editing or graphic design. But just remember that as a very customizable device, you're going to take a bit of time to experiment with it and incorporate it into your workflow. There's a certain learning curve to it, and it's not necessarily the best tool for everyone. But what I can say is, if you manage to adapt this to your workflow, it will save you a lot of time, for sure. And I think more importantly is, it reduces physical strain, which is important to me. And while this is far from a comprehensive video talking about all the things that a device like this can do, if you have any questions, just drop me a comment and I'll get back to it when I can. Till the next one, take care!